Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today. Grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, but most certainly grab your wine if it's the evening. Either way, let's get into it. Now, every choice we make writes a line in the story of our lives. I know it seems cliche, but as I'm saying those words, the intro to the days of our lives is playing in the background. But seriously, some choices lead to peace, to purpose, and to love. Others, made with good intentions, can draw us into the kind of darkness that steals everything from our world. What's even more unsettling is how far one person will go to protect a lie. Some people will manipulate, threaten, and destroy because once their illusion cracks, they rather burn everything around them than face the truth, especially when they believe they're smarter than everyone else. This story is about choices, the ones we make to protect ourselves and the ones that cost us everything. It's about how standing up for truth, even when done from a place of love and protection, can make you a target. Our story is about Nailah Franklin, a young woman whose success, intelligence, and good heart should have been her protection, but instead became the very thing weaponized against her. This is a story not just of love gone wrong. It's about obsession, control, and how one man's need to maintain his power ended in tragedy. The day started like any other day, September 18th, 2007. Nyla Franklin was known for her consistency, her rhythm. She wasn't the kind of person to disappear, miss a call, or forget an obligation. You could literally set your watch by her. She spoke with her boyfriend that morning, Andre, through several exchanges of emails, and ultimately decided that she would call her boss as she worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep and asked him for a day off. He said yes, and she went about her day. Her boyfriend Andre lived in Milwaukee and they had a long distance relationship. So they would often talk throughout the day. But when he called her later that day, he got no response. Friends and family also called, but got nothing. And something felt off. By 4 p.m., friends and family began receiving strange text messages from Nyla's phone. The words didn't sound like her. They were short, oddly phrased, emotionless. They called her back, but she didn't answer. And to their credit, they didn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. They acted by calling, trying to figure out why they couldn't speak to her directly. Messages came in claiming she was out to dinner and she'd call them later. But some of the texts they received confirming that she was at this place or the next, it didn't line up with places she would ever go. Her ex boyfriend received a phone call too, and also those odd text messages. And when he got the call, he picked up in response to the odd text messages. And the voice was muffled, but he thought it sounded like Nyla. Could it be Nyla? The voice whispered, "Hello, can you hear me?" Then silence. The messages stopped completely around 9:30 p.m. And by 11, Nyla's phone went straight to voicemail. Andre, desperate for a sign of life, sent one haunting email. "Are you alive?" September 19th, Nyla did not show up for work, and her supervisor did the right thing. He reached out to Leah, her sister. Leah instantly was alarmed because she also received some odd text messages as well. So she reached out to her siblings and some of Nyla's friends, but nobody had spoken to her since yesterday, earlier in that day. So she decided that she would go to Nyla's condo herself with a couple of her friends. When they got to the door, it was locked, but she had a key. Inside was complete chaos. Breakfast from the day before still sat on the counter. Nyla's laptop and iPad gone. her car missing from the parking space. And most importantly, Nyla wasn't there. Leah knew what it meant when a Black woman or Black people in general go missing. Silence, shrugs, minimal urgency. She wasn't having it. She worked in public relations and she leveraged her media contacts and got the story out locally about her sister. She made sure Chicago knew her sister's name. The search was on. The police questioned, of course, Andre, her boyfriend, and they were able to rule him out. Once again, the family and friends did verify that there were strange text messages, and police began to track Nyla's movement. In addition to leveraging her contacts, ensuring that local media outlets got the story out, Leah also got the police involved by filing a missing persons report. While the investigation was in its inception a breakthrough, a man reported seeing discarded boxes of Cymbalta, a drug Nyla sold as a part of her job. Now, this could have been a coincidence, merely someone who discarded some Cymbalta in the alley. They missed the trash can. But because of the media coverage, this witness called it in. And this is why it's so important that Black and missing here in America need the media coverage because the more you know, the more you can do. However, with this really good tip, by the time police arrived, the boxes were gone. But the alley, it was near the home of Reginald Potts, Nyla's recent ex boyfriend. Reginald was a man who once drove a white Bentley and claimed to be a real estate investor. The man who had charmed his way into Nyla's life and then terrorized her when she tried to leave. Let's rewind the clock back a little bit and talk about Nyla, the beautiful 28-year-old who was now missing. Nailah Franklin was born on April 12, 1979, in Chicago, Illinois, to Maria and Lee Franklin. Her, her father wasn't just a provider, he was a biochemist, a businessman, and a central figure in her life. After her parents' divorce when she was young, she lived primarily with her mother, but Nyla spent weekends and summers with her father, a bond that spoke to the stability and tradition of love in the Franklin family. After excelling in high school, she attended the University of Illinois, Urbana, and majored in marketing. Upon graduation, Nyla stepped confidently into her future, becoming a pharmaceutical sales representative, a competitive, respected field. She was doing well enough to purchase her own condo near the University of Chicago. Nyla was young, educated, attractive, and living the kind of independent life many aspire to. And in May of 2006, she met Reginald Potts. He drove a white Bentley, lived in a luxury high rise, and was a real estate investor. And he looked every bit the part of success. When you're a young woman, certain things catch your eye. And let's face it, she was a pharmaceutical sales rep, bringing in her own money, had her own place. And so there were a lot of things that could be very appealing to Nyla, whether it be Reginald's charm, his status, or maybe just the illusion of security. But for Nyla, it was likely a combination of all these factors that drew her in, and they began dating. But almost immediately, the cracks began to show. Reginald flirted with her friends, disrespected boundaries, and their relationship became a cycle: disrespect, breakup, reconciliation. This cycle, my friends, is not just drama, it's emotional abuse. It's the push and pull that keeps victims feeling disoriented, doubting themselves, and hoping for the version of the person that showed up at the beginning. I don't know if it was Nyla's first serious relationship or not, but she was hopeful, maybe even in love, and deeply unprepared for the kind of manipulation she was about to endure. As their off and on relationship continued, Nyla discovered that Reginald was not who he claimed to be. He had another girlfriend. He also had three children she didn't know about. On July 16, 2007, she finally had enough, and she sent an email titled Adios. In that email, she poured it all out: his arrogance, his constant flirting, his disrespect, and most importantly, his lies. She stated clearly that she was done. No more communication, no more merry-go-round. And just like that, Nyla stepped out of the storm, or at least she thought she did. The following month, she met someone new, Andre Wright, an attorney from Milwaukee. It would be long distance, but the connection was real. He was stable, respectful, safe. For Nyla, this was a sign that life could, in fact, move forward. But the saga of Reginald wasn't done. Nyla decided that she needed to warn the other women in Reginald's life. She located the mother of his youngest child and reached out via email and shared what she learned. She explained that she was once in a relationship with him, but had no idea that he had children or that he was even in a relationship with the young woman she reached out to. Now, we've all seen this play out in a variety of ways, and it ends one or two ways: either explosively or with sisterhood. Thankfully, in this case, the other woman was grateful. She didn't attack Nyla, she thanked her, and they stayed in touch. But when Reginald found out that Nyla reached out to his girlfriend and baby mother, the threats began. On September 6, 2007, Nyla received an email from an unidentified source containing an article attached about Reginald's criminal past. He had a long history of arrests for drugs, weapons, car theft. He even had escaped federal custody and taunted the FBI, claiming they'd never catch him. Spoiler, they did. Nyla forwarded the article to his former girlfriend she'd been in contact with, trying to warn her, trying to protect others. And that's when Reginald's threats intensified. He began leaving voicemails, one in particular, which Nyla played for a friend, chilled the room. He told her he could erase her, that he could send someone to her home right now. This wasn't posturing anymore. This was a man revealing exactly who he was. And for the first time, Nyla was truly afraid. She began giving her passwords and personal information to a friend just in case something happened. She then took it upon herself to contact the police to understand how she could file a restraining order. And shortly after learning how she could, she then emailed Reginald a warning, informing him that if he ever came near her, he'd be back in jail. A threat she thought he would adhere to. For a brief period, the threats stopped, but the communication between Nyla and the other girlfriend did not. The woman disclosed something new. She claimed that Reginald had been physically abusive to her throughout their relationship. That knowledge weighed heavily on Nyla. She decided she would take a brief trip to Milwaukee just to get away from the tension that was in Chicago. And she spent time with Andre, her boyfriend, for several days. It was an escape, a reprieve. On September 17th, Nyla returned to Chicago. She told friends that she was going to get that restraining order. She also told Reginald's girlfriend of her plans. And his girlfriend agreed to file one as well, believing that together they'd be taken seriously in court. That same day, Nyla told a close friend that Reginald threatened to kill her. And this leads us back to the present of our case. But before we move on, I want to ask you a question. We know that when someone shows you who they are the first time, we should believe them. But what happens when you see danger? Not just for yourself, but for others. Do you believe that Nyla was meddling? by continuing to communicate with Reginald's girlfriend? Or was she doing what many of us would do, trying to protect another woman from walking into the same fire? At what point does awareness turn into risk? And how do we know the difference? Back to our story. I want to recap what we already know. By the evening of September 19th, all communication from Nyla's phone ceased after 9:30 p.m. Concern grew rapidly, and when she failed to appear for work the following day, her sister, alarmed by the absence, attempted to reach her and eventually went back to check Nyla's apartment. Upon arrival, she discovered that Nyla's car, laptop, and iPad were missing, and the apartment appeared disordered and frazzled. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Nyla's sister promptly filed a missing persons report. She ensured that the disappearance of her sister drew the attention of local media, and the police initiated their investigation. During the early stages, a promising tip emerged. However, the evidence related to this lead was removed from the alley. And so now, investigators were attempting to unravel every detail about Nyla's life, including the contentious relationship that she had with Reginald Potts. But they didn't have to look too far for Reginald. Reginald came to the police himself. He claimed he wanted to talk, and he admitted to dating Nyla, but said they broke up after she found out he got another woman pregnant. He claimed that he hadn't seen or spoken to her since September 7th or 8th, and that on the day Nyla went missing, he got up around 11 a.m., ran errands, shopped with friends, then hit a bar with a woman. Police, of course, let him go with no evidence to keep him, but they knew they needed to check out his alibi. Meanwhile, friends and family canvassed the city. They passed out flyers. They kept the pressure on. In a suburb right outside of Chicago called Calumet City, a police officer was on duty when he noticed several boxes stacked in a parking lot. He thought that to be unusual. So he went to check out the boxes, and they were addressed to Nailah Franklin. Aware of the disappearance, he reached out to local law enforcement and told them of the boxes he recovered. But they later would find out that where they found these boxes addressed to Nyla, there was a property, a building owned by Reginald's brother in law. And that would be important as we go further into our investigation. Now, the next course of action for investigators was to gather Nyla's phone records. And Nyla's last ping was in Calumet City, where they found those boxes, and Hammond. Now, she had no ties to the area and no reason to be there. They also noticed that she made several 911 phone calls. However, there was no recording of those calls. Those phone calls came from Reginald's house. Police were starting to build their case. They found Nyla's missing car a few miles away from where the boxes were found, and inside they discovered papers that had blood on them. It looked as if someone had tried to clean up her car because they found nothing else that was substantial. Then, September 27th, patrol officers found more suspicious items in a wooded area behind Reginald's brother in law's property. They searched, and there they found a shallow grave. The body was naked and severely decomposed, and through dental records, they confirmed that it was Nailah Franklin. The autopsy confirmed that she died by asphyxiation. She had been killed 8 to 12 days before being found. Now, the question was no longer what happened, it was how to prove it. Despite Reginald's denial, surveillance footage told a different story, and several witnesses at Nyla's condo reported seeing Reginald's white Bentley in Nyla's parking garage around September 16th to 17th, which made him by default a liar, as he said the last time he spoke or saw her was September 6th and 7th, September 7th or 8th. One person said they saw him in the hallway, and a security guard even confronted him. He gave them a fake name and disappeared before police arrived. Surveillance footage showed both Nyla and Reginald leaving the parking garage on September 18th, a little before 1 p.m. Then the camera picked them up at 1 p.m., and Nyla was walking in front of him and he followed close behind. This was the last time Nyla was ever seen again. 4 hours later, the same cameras caught him leaving the condo through the garage holding a laptop. 2 days after finding the body of Nyla, police put a search warrant on Reginald's home and they found Nyla's laptop and iPad. Nyla's iPad name had been changed to Reginald's on September 19th. But after all, there was still the alibi that investigators had to deal with because he had this whole timeline of the people he was with and what he was doing. So they called in those friends, and under duress and questioning for hours, a friend finally broke down and admitted that Reginald was never with him. The police brought in Reginald hoping to get a confession, to get some type of admission of guilt. However, he did not cooperate. In fact, he said that the police were lying, they were trying to frame him, and though they had this camera surveillance footage, that was something that they concocted on their own and that the witnesses were lying. And so they asked him if he wanted to prove his innocence, then he should cooperate and do a lineup. Instead, he says no, sits on the floor, and starts taking off his clothes. He was charged with first degree murder in December of 2007. But Reginald knew how to manipulate the system. He delayed the trial for 8 years, hiring and firing lawyers to buy time. Finally, in October of 2015, he went to trial. The state had 30 witnesses, cell phone data, and surveillance footage, digital trails. The defense opted to just cast doubt via the evidence that the state presented, implying that it had been fabricated and that some of the cell phone data was in question. However, the trial lasted 2 weeks, and after deliberation from the jury, which only lasted about 2 hours, the jury came back and made their decision that they would convict him of first degree murder, and they found him guilty. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Takeaway: Nailah Franklin didn't die because she was reckless. She didn't die because she made bad choices. She died because she dared to tell the truth. She cared deeply, not just about herself, but about the other women who might have found themselves caught in the same manipulation web she had just escaped. She could have walked away quietly, blocked the number, moved on, but instead she chose the harder path, the courageous one. She spoke up. She warned another woman. She refused to let someone else suffer in silence just because she had made it out. But here's the dark reality. Some people, especially those built on lies, see truth as a threat. To them, being exposed feels like death. And when their mask starts to slip, they'll do anything to keep the illusion intact, even kill. Because for people like Reginald Potts, power isn't about love or connection, it's about control. And once he lost control over Nyla, he couldn't bear to think of her holding the power to expose him. So he tried to silence her forever. This is the cruel paradox of truth. It sets you free. And the very thing that he tried to hide by killing Nyla is the very thing that I'm repeating on this podcast. The ugly truth about who Reginald Potts was. He was a manipulator, a narcissist, and a bully. He thought that he could bully Nyla once he realized he couldn't control the narrative. But the irony of the entire situation is that his ugly truth is being told every time it is repeated on a true crime show, podcast, and article. The ugliness of Reginald Potts is forever in the open as Nyla's story is being told. You guys might not have the same takeaway as me. Maybe you think there was some things that could have been prevented throughout this entire scenario. But let me know what you think. And the way that you can engage me is by leaving a comment. You can leave a comment if you are listening on Spotify, and or you can go to our social media platforms and comment underneath today's case. Let's get into true crime and current events. Now, if you guys are not familiar with the Sonia Massey story, I do want to provide a synopsis before giving you an update on the verdict of that case. On July 6th of 2024, Sonia Massey, a 36-year-old Black woman living in Springfield, Illinois area, called 911 reporting a possible prowler at her home in Woodside Township. Two deputies from the county sheriff's office responded. One was Sean Grayson, and the other was Dawson Farley. After searching the property and finding no clear sign of a prowler, the deputies entered Massey's home. Free video body camera footage later showed a confrontation. Massey moved toward a pot of boiling water on her stove, and the deputies ordered her to drop it. And at one point, Massey said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." Grayson drew his firearm, and in the ensuing interaction, he fired 3 shots at Massey, one of which struck her head. She died later of the wound. After the shooting, Grayson was fired from the sheriff's office. He was indicted by a grand jury on July 17th of 2024. The charges included 3 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, and official misconduct. The case sparked national attention because Massey called for help rather than being a suspect. The incident raised questions of police response, use of force, mental health, and race in law enforcement. In the aftermath, the Illinois Department of Justice launched a civil rights investigation into the county sheriff's office. The sheriff announced his retirement. Massey's family secured a settlement of $10 million with the county in February of 2025. Legislative reforms in Illinois were paused. The House Bill of 1953, known as Sonia Massey's bill, requiring more thorough background checks for law enforcement hiring. Trial update. The criminal trial of Sean Grayson began on October 22nd, 2025 in Peoria County. It was moved because of the publicity. After a 7-day trial on October 29th, 2025, the jury found Grayson guilty of second-degree murder, not the first-degree murder charges prosecutors had sought. Because of the second-degree conviction, Grayson now faces a sentencing range of 4 to 20 years in prison, or possibly even probation, though it's unlikely in these circumstances. Sentencing is scheduled for January 29th, 2026. The family of Massey expressed deep disappointment that the jury did not convict of first degree murder, calling the outcome a miscarriage of justice. Now, let's talk a little bit about the decision for second degree murder. The jury believed that Grayson had an unreasonable belief of threat. That was his defense. He believed that there was a reasonable belief of threat, and because of that, he was justified to shoot. But the second degree verdict implicates that the jury believed that there was an unreasonable belief of threat, which is a requirement for second degree murder in Illinois, but did not find beyond a reasonable doubt the intent of premeditation required for first degree murder, which is why I believe the family felt it was a miscarriage of justice. Because if you listen to the body camera footage and watch it, you hear Grayson say, "If you hit me with that pot of water, I will kill you." Right? And I think that can possibly speak to premeditation. He said something was going to happen, and then it did. However, the jury heard all the evidence and convicted of the lesser charge. Now, in the case, the jury's job ended once they reached a verdict. Under Illinois criminal procedure, the sentencing phase for second degree murder and most felony convictions is handled solely by the presiding judge. I'll update you guys on what happens in January. I'm sure it will be national news, but in case you're just so busy, I definitely will tell you what happens during sentencing. As far as my opinion on what the verdict was, I can see how the jury was able to reach second degree because I think it can be hard to prove first, despite what I just said to you on maybe why the family and others felt, including the state, that it was premeditation. That's a little harder to prove, I think, in this particular case. However, I'm just happy that he was convicted. I do have a bonus episode that I will be releasing for you guys on Friday, so stay tuned. But that is our case for today. Until next time, friends, this is Murder in the Black.